College football is back, and we're back on the Big Mountain, giving you a fresh take on college football betting focused on the Big Ten and the Mountain West.
And if you're new to this channel, I'm JY. This is my good friend Steve. And in this episode, we're going to take another look at conference realignment and expansion. We did our first episode about a week ago.
Super popular.
We got a lot of views, some comments, which is great. Just wanted to come back and do some updates because a lot has transpired actually since that video, especially when we're talking about the ACC and some of what was done there. And we do ask that you kind of stick through the whole video. We're going to go through a lot of different things. We're going to go through ACC and what transpired, where the Pac-12 is now, looking at specifically Wazoo and Oregon State and kind of where that leaves them, and really tie that to the Mountain West and where we think those two teams in the Mountain West in particular in the Pac-12 may end up here in the next probably few weeks. I don't think it's going to be real long from what we're hearing. So just hang with us here. We're going to do a little bit of history lesson on some of this, but also get to our opinions and thoughts and analysis as well. On Friday, we all learned that the ACC presidents and chancellors voted that morning to add Stanford, Cal, and SMU to the ACC. That brings them to 18 schools, members, 17 of them being football schools. The comment from the ACC commissioner, Phillips, was that you either get on the bus or you get left behind. Yep. And clearly that's what's happening right now. I mean, I think conferences are panicking a little bit, seeing where teams are going, and they better get some teams or they're not going to get anybody.
Nobody else wants to end up like the Pac-12 is now.
Exactly.
The Pac-4, the Pac-2,
the Pac-4, Pac-2, I guess at this point. Yeah. So we also learned with that over the weekend, all three had agreed to forego large TV revenue with the ACC, with SMU actually receiving no TV revenue for 9 years.
Crazy.
It's unbelievable.
Yes.
9 years of no TV revenue. Cal and Stanford are actually going to be 30% of the TV revenue. So really taking you talked about discount ducks.
Yes.
Maybe a little bit discount Cal and Stanford. I don't know what they would be. It doesn't ring like discount ducks does. But right now there's a pool of about $50 to $60 million in revenue for the ACC schools. So significant revenues there, but these three teams are coming in with a small share or no, in terms of SMU, no share of the TV revenue. Yeah. Obviously absent in all of this are Wazoo and Oregon State. And if you remember, the ACC did meet with Wazoo when the Mountain West kind of made their pitch here about a week or two ago. So interesting that both of those schools obviously weren't included here on this at all. And that's where I'm going to focus the discussion here a little bit. But before we get to those two schools and those two teams, what are going to be their realistic choices moving forward? To which I believe there's going to only be two. We're going to get to that, but like, what choices do they have? Personally, I think there's two realistic choices for these teams. But before we get there, I would like to lay a foundation a little bit of why we got to where we are. I know we did a little bit of a history lesson, specifically more Big Ten related last time. I want to do it more from kind of a Pac-12 standpoint. Yeah. And let's go back here in time. And we'll put up a slide a little bit that shows a little bit. I think pictorially it's a little easier to see as we go back maybe over the last year to 15 months where things have come from and why we are where we are.
I think it's a good idea to show everyone how we went from the Pac-12 to the Pac-2.
Absolutely. So let's start there. I want to go back in time and let's start with kind of the bombshell announcement that really began all of this when USC and UCLA said they were going to leave the Pac-12 for Steve's beloved Big Ten. This occurred in summer of last year, so it's been a little over a year now that occurred.
June 30th, I think.
Right. So
2022, last
end of June, beginning of July.
Yep.
I didn't get the exact date, but so right around there. And just a bombshell that happened when that came out. And I still obviously feel that's leaving wakes of what transpired then and what you're seeing now and what's happening here with the Pac-12. So much so that that Pac-2 is almost non-existent, and I think it's going to be non-existent. That's where I'm headed with this. But before we get there, the two teams that left, USC and UCLA, had been in the Pac-12 for 94 years.
Conference of Champions, they were founding members. Yeah,
I mean, just unbelievable, right? Yeah. So, Steve, I guess my question to you on that piece is, were you as stunned as I think everybody else was? Do you have any inclinations of that? Or where were you at when that all transpired here a little over a year ago?
So I really wasn't stunned, and I'll tell you why. And we talked about this a little bit on the last video, but just to get into more depth. So prior to that, the Big Ten had hired Kevin Warren to be their commissioner. He was a former NFL executive, and he basically, when he came in, he said he wanted to turn the Big Ten into, instead of being a Midwestern conference, into a national conference. Okay. And basically make it as not a competitor to the NFL, but kind of a smaller mini version of the NFL.
Okay.
So I wasn't, and there were rumblings. I had heard from a couple of my contacts, and I saw different things on the message boards out there that there were rumblings within different athletic departments about USC, about the Big Ten having an interest in USC. Okay. And my contacts at Penn State had told me at the time that there was no interest in UCLA.
I remember you saying that.
Yes, they were not going to take UCLA. Mm-hmm. However, Kevin Warren, the commissioner, he negotiated that. The Fox, like we've talked about this before, the networks and being the money driver and all this. Fox really...
It's the number one driver of all. In my opinion, absolutely. Number one driver.
Yep.
Didn't mean to interrupt you, but we'll get to that here in a little bit, but... Yeah.
So Fox wanted that LA market. If they're paying these huge rights fees for the Big Ten. They want Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State playing in that LA market. They want those people in LA to be interested in Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and all those Big Ten teams. So,
Makes sense.
Right. But in order to get USC, and USC was interested in coming along, they felt like they were kind of like how Florida State is now. They felt like they were making all the money for the Pac-12. They didn't like some of the decisions by the commissioner and how the revenue was being shared, so they were looking to get out.
Yep.
But their stipulation is they wanted to bring UCLA with them. They have a 100-year rivalry. They're right next door in the same city.
Yeah.
That was the stipulation, and so Kevin Warren made that happen. I wasn't super surprised, only because I was surprised that UCLA was coming along. I thought that was a non-starter. I thought maybe they would get paired with like a Stanford or something like that at the time.
Right.
But that was the stipulation, was to bring UCLA, and as soon as they did that, like you said, it was a bombshell, started a whole row of dominoes.
Yep.
So, yeah, that's kind of my thought on that. And it made sense within that picture of making the Big Ten a national conference for the networks, which is really the underlying theme of all this.
Correct. For both the Big Ten and for USC.
Yes, for USC. Yep.
Right. I mean, it made sense for both of them.
Made sense for both of them, yeah.
And looking back, clearly it made sense that USC wasn't going to get that with the Pac-12.
You're absolutely right, yep.
So, maybe something obvious, but maybe wouldn't have been as much of a surprise if people truly understand this isn't about football.
It's about money.
It's about money.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing is USC for so long was carrying the weight of the rest of the conference.
Yep.
They were sick of it. They wanted to compete for national titles, so they felt like they needed that same revenue level that the Big Ten teams, the SEC teams were getting.
Absolutely. Makes sense.
And it was all about money.
Yeah.
Which has negative connotations, but it makes sense, like you said.
Right.
If they want to compete, they need that money to invest in their program.
Correct.
And so they went from carrying a conference to joining a conference, which is already rich, and they could be one of 3 or 4 really good programs.
Right. So I wonder then, do you believe, or do you think, or do you know, honestly, if they obtained any other offers, specifically USC? I think the UCLA came along with UC, as you just described, but was this a Big Ten going directly after a school that they wanted, which clearly probably wanted out because of what we just said? Or do you think there was some sort of a behind-the-scenes, I don't want to say bidding war, but was there other conferences maybe involved here that nobody knows about?
Not that I know of, and I don't think so, and here's why.
Okay.
So the Big Ten and Fox are basically a partnership. The Fox owns a majority of the Big Ten network, and the Big Ten network is one of the main revenue drivers for the Big Ten.
Okay.
So, and what's little known, we've talked about this a couple times, but what a lot of people don't understand is, so the Big Ten actually doesn't own their media rights for the games. The Big Ten Network, the way they structured it is the Big Ten Network owns the rights to the games.
Okay.
Which the Big Ten Network is a partnership between the Big Ten and Fox. So basically Fox, now that they own a majority share, they are the driver. And Fox wanted USC. Fox wanted that LA market. Okay. So their only partner is the Big Ten, really. Their own main partner is the Big Ten. So it just made sense, and I don't think there was a bidding war. I think it was just one of those things. It made sense for Fox, it made sense for the Big Ten, and it made sense for USC all around.
Trifecta.
Exactly.
Yeah, definitely. Got to use a betting term.
Yes, yeah.
So, so let's fast forward now. So, big waves throughout the college football conferences, and what's going to happen. The Pac-12 losing USC obviously is huge for them. And then we come to the spring of 2023, so a little bit of time passes. And what appears, and you mentioned this on our first episode regarding conference realignment, what appears to be the Pac-12 trying to maintain a team in that Southern California market.
Yep.
And that's when the news comes out here about San Diego State joining, not possibly, but joining the Pac-12. And again, as I mentioned in that first episode, when I first heard it, and even I think the headlines at the time, it was like a done deal thing. It wasn't, it might happen, It was San Diego State is going to the Pac-12.
It was just the only thing was the holding up was their contract, the media deal. But other than that, it was a done deal. It was going to happen.
And this isn't the first time San Diego State has looked to leave the Mountain West in the past. I'm not making them a scapegoat or blaming them for anything. I get it. But that it has happened in the past. So when that news broke, as I said, we thought it was going to happen. Well, then they asked for an extension from the Mountain West.
Yes, on their decision.
And it's notification to leave the Mountain West. They asked for an extension. The Mountain West denies that request for an extension. Why would you do that?
Exactly.
Right. So they deny it. And San Diego State says, okay, we're going to stay with the Mountain West. So, again, it looks like the Pac-12 is trying to maintain that market and maintain, frankly, the Pac-12 because things are starting to fall apart. And we're going to get into that. Obviously, now we are where we are.
Yep.
I don't think at the time maybe people realized how much things were going to fall apart and become a Pac-2 here in the beginning of September. Certainly the teams did. People knew what was going on behind the scenes for sure. But so I want to talk to you a little bit about that. I mean, were you as stunned as I was when it first came out that Washington and Oregon, so the next piece that hits is, the first big bombshell is the USC UCLA moves. And then we hear here this summer that Washington and Oregon announced that they're now leaving the Pac-12 and moving to the Big Ten. So now 4 of arguably the biggest schools in the Pac-12 are now Big Ten schools.
Yes.
So what are you feeling about that when that all occurred?
Well, so when we talked about this on the last episode, was I surprised or not? Yes and no. So here's the thing. Again, going back to Kevin Warren, Kevin Warren was the commissioner of the Big Ten, he was trying to bring in Oregon and Washington. They vetted Oregon and Washington. The Big Ten lawyers, they looked at everything with the program. They had meetings. They were ready to bring them in. But there was no media partner. That was the difference because Fox wanted USC and UCLA.
Sure. Right.
Nobody really wanted Oregon or Washington at the time. No one was willing to pay up and pony up that extra money. So Kevin Warren, his contract doesn't get renewed with the Big Ten. He goes back to takes an NFL position, I think, with the Bears. The new commissioner comes in the 80s, and the presidents and the new commissioners say, we're done with expansion.
Right.
We're not moving west anymore. Nothing, all that. However, once the Pac-12 started to crumble down to the Pac-10 to the Pac-8, whatever, then they had an opportunity to add those 2 teams at a discount. And that's where we get. So they're going to take, I think it's about a 50% revenue share from the other teams, and so that's where we got the discount ducks.
Right.
And so then I thought about it. You were talking about what are the names for the other teams?
Yeah.
The bottom dollar Bears.
There
you go. Cal, yeah. So I'll have to keep thinking of some other ones.
Bring up another one. Okay.
Yeah, but those discount ducks, that's a huge thing. Oregon is a big program.
Yep.
A big brand name, but it didn't make sense to add them before, but it made sense to add them now because they could get them at a discount.
Right.
They didn't have to pay that full share to get them.
Yeah.
So for me, yes, I was a little bit surprised because I thought that had been laid to rest. I thought it wasn't going to happen. I thought that actually the Pac-12 could continue to survive, and that was a key moment. There was the Big 12 and the Pac-12, and it looked like one was going to survive and one was not going to survive.
Right.
We talked about this in the last episode. The Big 12 was aggressive. They added teams. They survived. The Pac-12 messed around, fussed around. They had that chance to add San Diego State, to add that Southern California market.
Right.
They said, no, we're going to hold off. We're the Conference of Champions. We're great.
Right.
We don't need you. We're going to get all this money.
Almost too big to fail type of thing, right?
Yes, too confident. Yes, too big for the britches, too big to fail, however you want to say it.
Yeah.
And you can see there was two different strategies by the Big 12 and the Pac-12. And so right now, between those two, the Big 12 were the obvious winners, and the Pac-12 not so much.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's lay this out here. In a 12-month span, the Pac-12 now has lost 4 of their largest revenue-generating schools. So red alert. If it wasn't already a red alert, it's a red alert here for the Pac-12. And we've said this before, but it's all about the mighty dollar.
Absolutely.
And if these are your 4 largest revenue generating, specifically USC, but the 4 of them, that mighty dollar comes into play real quick, and people have to make decisions fairly quickly that otherwise they may not make. I think it's clear that the Southern Cal markets here are the winner, or were the breadwinner for the Pac-12.
Absolutely.
They're now gone.
Yeah.
So the schools that are remaining don't have that revenue generation that they once had. So what does that mean? Do they have to look at another conference? Do they have to deal with where they're at? We talked a little bit about the debt last episode. So when you're losing some of your bigger revenue generators, and now you have a debt to deal with,
$50 million.
That's a scary place to be.
Absolutely.
So with that, let's look a little bit more detail into the Pac-12 TV deals. And hindsight being what it is, I think this is the key to explain some of why we are where we are. So there's reporting and some speculation that there was a proposed deal with Apple for the Pac-12 universities. There would be about 25 million. I've seen different numbers on that, 23, 25, with some incentives and whatnot. But I'm going to call it a $25 million deal with Apple for the Pac-12. It's also reported that ESPN offered $30 million per school to the Pac-12 that the Pac-12 didn't accept. They nixed it. Now, they came up with a better offer, or a counter offer, I should say. Of course, it's better for them. But a counter offer of a whopping $50 million per school, and ESPN walked away.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Great.
So again, it gets back to your comment about being too big for your britches.
Yes.
And thinking maybe something that you're not. Not that you're not a group of 5, but $50 million is a substantial increase over the 30 that they offered you. I get a counter offer, but that's awfully hefty.
And now you're taking away one of your biggest bidders out of that bidding war.
Exactly. So now I ask you, is the Pac-12 worth $50 million with no USC, no UCLA, no Oregon, and no Washington? Are they even worth the 25 that Apple had apparently put up at the time?
Probably not, but that was kind of a revolutionary deal that Apple was looking at.
Sure.
And they probably aren't worth that, and maybe they could have gotten more. But at that point, I think they had probably set their own fate.
Absolutely. Yes, for sure. And for comparison purposes, for those that don't know what these deals are and what other conferences make, the Big 12 schools get $31.7 million a year. That could go up to $50 million depending on revenue inflations and changes in revenue numbers. But again, you're comparing Big 12 at 31.7, and the Pac-12 is coming saying, hey, we want 50 with it.
Yep.
And now we got no USC, no UCLA, no Washington, and no Oregon. They've cooked their goose here, I think, at this point. So, they wanted to play hardball. That's what happens sometimes. You can win, you can lose, and they lost, and they continue to lose here. I think this is a similar situation. You brought it up on the last episode. You brought it up earlier, too, about FSU, dealing kind of that with the ACC, feeling like the breadwinner for that conference. Are they looking to get out of there? You brought them up as maybe the number 2 team after Notre Dame, looking to go to the Big Ten. because they're wanting more TV revenue as well. I mean, do you have any other I know we talked about it last week, but any other comments on that looking at FSU?
Yeah, so before we get into FSU and the ACC, if you don't mind, I want to just take one step back because you were talking about the Pac-12 numbers.
Okay.
So the comparison to those schools that are now going to the Big Ten, and we know the discount Ducks are getting a reduced share of this as well as Washington as well. Right. But last year in 2022, so before USC made the move and all that, the Big Ten paid out $58.9 million per school.
Wow. Okay.
Last year in 2022, with this new deal kicking in, with money from Fox. Now they have Fox, they have CBS, and they have NBC, all three media partners. With now the LA market, those revenue numbers are expected to go up by close to $10 million per year. By 2029, the revenue projections are that each Big Ten team will be taking in $100 million a year.
Oh my goodness!
So by the end of this decade, the projections are $100 million. Oh, and actually the projections are at least 100. Right. $100 million plus per year.
Wow.
So that leads us into what you were just saying, FSU and the ACC. So the ACC number is significantly smaller than that. This last year in 2022, the ACC paid out $39 million.
Okay.
So they're already about $20 million behind right now as we speak.
Okay.
Florida State is making $20 million less per year than the Big Ten teams.
Schools. Okay.
And that's just going to keep growing because that ACC ACC signed a contract with ESPN through 2036.
Okay.
And everybody said, oh, that's the smartest thing in the world. They're locked into ESPN. They're going to be on ESPN. They're going to be on SportsCenter. They're going to be on College Game Day. That's so smart. Well, now all of those teams are locked into that smaller revenue till 2036.
Yeah.
So 39 million, 40 million, maybe it goes up a little bit. They might have some kickers or something. So let's say it goes up to 50 million per school. They're losing $50 million per year then towards the end of the contract to the Big Ten schools.
Yeah.
So if you, over 5 years to $250 million.
That's crazy.
It is. I mean, and how do you compete? You're supposed to compete on a level playing field.
Right.
So that is that driver for schools like Florida State and Clemson. And I share this on our other episode. My sources tell me at Penn State that Florida State is the next target of expansion. Not until they become AAU members.
Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
But that's going to be coming up soon.
Okay.
And you can see how that makes sense to Florida State and why Florida State's wanting to get out of the ACC.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Goes right into the line of everything we've been saying in terms of these schools looking for the dollar and for some of them deserving the dollar. All right, so let's get back to the Pac-12 then.
Okay.
And what that means specifically for the Mountain West, because that's where I wanted to get to here, right? We did a lot of kind of history lessons, a lot of where things were at, but want to get to specifically the Wazoo pitch, the Oregon State pitch, and whether or not they're going to become Mountain West members. Commissioner Navarez for the Mountain West was both in Colorado State.
Yep.
For that game when they played the Cougars, and then she on Sunday she was in San Jose State when the Beavers played San Jose State. So interesting how that obviously works. She's clearly courting those two teams, I would assume. Also on Friday, I think this is really important. The American Athletic Conference confirmed that they're not looking to move to the West. They're not looking to move westward. So maybe a potential suitor for schools that are looking for a home. But apparently it's not the AAC. Right. So
can I add something on that real
absolutely
quick? So we did you and I discussed this. We had a viewer on that asked us that question.
Yes.
Was there any possibility of merging? His question was, is there any possibility of merging the Mountain West?
Right.
With bringing Oregon State and Washington State along and merging with the AAC to create a super conference.
Right.
My answer to that, I gave a short answer on that, but I promised a longer answer. My answer to that is it does not make logistical sense. Okay.
Right.
The Big Ten, we talked about those projections. They're making $60, $70, $80, $90 million a year. They can afford to travel to send those schools from the West Coast to the East Coast every week if need be. But those AAC schools and the Mountain West schools, that makes no sense logistics-wise for that travel from Boise to Memphis, and all those other places in the AAC. It just doesn't make any sense. There's not enough money for it. I don't see that as a possibility.
Sure.
And like you said, they just confirmed they're not looking to move there.
Definitely not looking to move there. It's also said that Wazoo and Oregon State are working together right now on this. Obviously,
Which
makes
makes
sense.
sense,
I mean,
yes.
you would think they're probably working together in the
package
same
deal.
They're in the same boat.
Yeah.
And they would like to see the Pac-12 brand retained.
Yeah.
That ship may have sailed. Unless they have something up their sleeves that a lot of people aren't thinking about. I don't see how at this point that can happen unless they're going to come to the Mountain West with we'll do this as long as something, and I don't know what that something is. Something with some sort of a Pac-12 brand. Is it?
Right.
Are they going to redivision the conference and somehow get Pac-12 conference or a Pac-12 division or something? I'm just throwing crazy stuff out there, but maybe that's what it's going to take. I don't know.
It's possible, but like we said, how does that make if they're keeping the Pac-12? Then they're going to bring that debt with them.
Right.
Basically, are they going to, if you're going to carry the Pac-12 name and the Pac-12 entity, are you going to carry that debt with you to the Mountain West?
Right.
If I'm the Mountain West, why do I want to take on $50,
Right.
$60 million
Absolutely.
of old bad debt that had nothing to do with me?
Sure. Right. Yeah. If I'm the Mountain West, I want absolutely nothing to do with the Pac-12. I mean, we'll give you an offer, Wazoo and Oregon State, to join, but it has nothing to do with the Pac-12. And so I talked early on about where these teams are. We have a map here I want to put up. It shows all Division I schools here, and I have in red circles where the Mountain West schools are right now. So if you're a Mountain West fan, you're obviously very much aware of where your Mountain West schools are. But if you're not, you may not exactly know where the Mountain West schools are. And then in blue, I have both Wazoo and Oregon State. Just to show you where I think it makes complete sense for them to join the Mountain West. That's right where they are. And again, I said it in the first episode, I think this makes for the premier West Coast, and I don't even want to say West Coast, I want to say western half of the United States conference here. I mean, it's not even West Coast. When you're talking Colorado, you're talking almost up to the Midwest. So, western half of the U.S., you're the premier conference out there, and this is a no-brainer for me.
And on our map, you can clearly see there's kind of a line where, and to the west of that, it's basically now at this point Mountain West. And that's it.
And the sporadic teams that have now joined other schools for the most part, or other conferences.
Yeah, they're correct.
So I guess at this point I say, what options do these two schools have? And so I'm just going to throw some options up there. I'll give you my realistic. I think one of my two actual realistic options for them. One of them to me is they try to rebrand the Pac-12. They try to become refounding members and somehow salvage what's left of a two-team conference.
It's possible. Yeah.
Possible. Do they become independents? Again, I think that's possible.
Especially if they work together.
Yeah. Pac-12 goes away, they become independents. Do they join the Mountain West? Obviously, we've been talking about that. Do they try and join a different conference? Certainly, are there other conferences still out there willing to accept Wazoo and Oregon State? We don't know that at this point. In my opinion, the ACC ship clearly has sailed. They chose the three schools that they wanted to bring in. Wazoo and Oregon State weren't a part of that, and so that ship has sailed. And the ACC, in my opinion, has said no thanks publicly. We're not going to do it.
I agree. So, and if I could just add a little context there, it makes sense when you think about it. Stanford, high academic.
Yes.
Cal, Berkeley, high academic. SMU. They have a ton of money down there, oil money and all kinds of money. We won't even get into all that.
Yeah.
They can take that discount rate because they have those donors.
Right.
Washington State and Oregon State don't necessarily have those donors where they can just say, like SMU, you don't even need to pay me. I'll come work for free for 9 years.
And that's basically what they're doing.
Yes.
So, great points. So, in my opinion, there's two realistic options. Join the Mountain West, which to me makes the most sense. I've said that now a couple times. Or become an independent.
Yeah.
Both of them together, just going off and being independent. I think that's the only two options for them. If I'm them, I don't know why I'm not in a conference. There's a lot of expense. Notre Dame, as you mentioned, has a great TV deal. I don't know how they become independents financially. I mean, I know how they can be independents, but financially, that'd be a hard pill to swallow, I think.
Maybe, and it might be a scenario where they do it for a year or two just to figure out things to settle down, but I can't see it long term.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Short term, year or two makes complete sense. So, I asked you then, Steve, if this happens, who do you think the bigger winner here is? The ACC, getting the three schools we now know they have offered, or the Mountain West? Potentially, let's just say they get Washington State and Oregon State. So, who do you see as the bigger winner here, the ACC or the Mountain West?
So you're going to hate this. I'm going to give you two answers.
Oh, well, I am going to hate it.
Exactly.
I thought you were going to say something else, but go ahead.
Short term,
yes,
the ACC is the winner. Okay, short term. Here's the reason why. They're getting 3 viable programs that keep them basically in the game. Something we haven't talked about yet, the ACC and their contract with each other and with ESPN is they have this competition clause where they have to keep a certain number of schools. Okay. And if they do, there's an automatic, I guess you call it an escalator clause, where by adding those teams, they get some more money added onto the contract. And they keep their contract whole with ESPN. So even if Florida State leaves, Clemson leaves, they have those replacements already in place. They don't have to worry about the whole thing blowing up. So short term, I think that they are actually the winner. Long term, the ACC is a walking corpse. That's just the way it is. All of their good programs want to get out. And all of those programs, the majority of the good programs in the ACC will be courted by either the Big Ten or the SEC, the top programs. These new 3 schools, that's just a Band-Aid. It's just a Band-Aid. It's a temporary thing. Gets them maybe closer to... The big thing is the ACC has this grant of rights. There are some people that say it is rock solid. It'll go to 2036. Some of the people I respect and that say that there's no way it's going to last that long, a year or 2 tops, until it gets all blown up. This is just a move to get them closer to that 2036. So keep them above ground a couple more years. So in the long term, as far as being a viable conference, if the Mountain West is able to add those 2 teams, I think that makes them a viable conference and keeps them as the premier western half of the country conference. And really, college football right now is going towards a model of you have the Big Ten, you have the SEC, 2 richest conferences, and then everybody else. So that move, I think, would position the Mountain West to be at the head of that everybody else group. They call it the Group of 5 now. What are they going to call it in 10 years? But I really think that keeps them viable and keeps them well positioned to compete to be the best of the rest.
And just one last thing, there were some comments that I've seen on Reddit and some other places about the Mountain West dissolving. I just don't see that happening whatsoever. There would have to be 9 schools that approve dissolution of the Mountain West. That's 9 of 12, 75%. There's no way that's going to happen. I give that a 0.01% chance of happening. And even that's probably a too great of a percentage that's going to happen. I mean, with the exception of possibly San Diego State, because, again, they've been looking at that for a while. It wouldn't be too big of a surprise. I don't see any of them probably approving it, and to get 9 of 12, that's just pie in the sky talk. I don't think people understand what they mean when they say, they're going to dissolve the Mountain West. I don't know what they're thinking.
The only thing I can think of is they think that there's going to be some kind of merger like you were talking about when they take on the Pac-12 name, but they would still be together. But even then, it doesn't make a lot of sense for the reasons we talked about.
It'd be the Pac-12 Mountain West, and then you've got 12 of 14 schools with a different name.
Pac-West maybe.
Pac-West, who knows. But anyway, that's about does it for me. I know we went through a lot there. Anything you want to wrap up with here, Steve?
That was a great overview, I think, and really gears towards showing what's really happened with the Pac-12, how they went from the Pac-12 to the Pac-2, how the Big 12 survived and why the Pac didn't survive, and how that positions the Mountain West. I will say, so going forward, we're going to continue to do these expansion videos, conference realignment videos. And I'm going to, like I said before, I'm going to keep my ear to the ground. And actually, my contact at Penn State recently said he has some information for me that has to do with the Big Ten and the ACC.
Interesting.
So I'm going to try and get that in our next video, our next conference realignment video.
So our first one was a little Big Ten focused. This one's certainly more Pac-12 and Mountain West focused. It's time we get back to the Big Ten. So maybe the third one will have a little more of a Big Ten ACC focus for us. So
sounds good.
Awesome. Great, Steve. Hey, we appreciate you watching. If you really like what we're saying, grab a subscribe so you can get the notifications when we have another video posting up. Hopefully you're watching our weekly picks and our summary episodes, our rapid reactions. And with all of that, we'll see you next time on the Big Mountain.